The maple trees lining our street had just begun to turn golden when we moved into Oakwood Heights. After years of apartment living and careful saving, my wife Sarah and I had finally purchased our dream home, a modest 4-bedroom colonial at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The backyard was what sold us on the property. It stretched nearly half an acre, backing up to a wooded area with a narrow dirt path that meandered through the neighborhood. Our twin 8-year-olds, Emma and Ethan, fell in love with the yard immediately. They spent hours climbing trees and building forts while Sarah and I watched from the patio, marveling at how perfectly everything had worked out. The previous owners had mentioned that neighbors occasionally used the trail behind our property for walking dogs or jogging, but assured us it was never busy and rarely a disturbance. During those first few months, we integrated seamlessly into the community. We attended the summer block party, joined the neighborhood watch group chat, and exchanged pleasantries with dog walkers who passed by our unfenced backyard. The children made friends quickly, and Sarah and I found ourselves invited to weekend barbecues and book clubs. The idea for the gate came after a series of minor incidents. First, someone let their dog wander into our yard, leaving unwelcome surprises for Emma to discover during playtime. Then, a teenager on a mountain bike nearly collided with Ethan one evening. The final straw was finding beer cans near our garden shed one Monday morning, evidence of weekend partying we had not authorized on our property. I decided to take action, but wanted to be thorough and considerate. I contacted the county office first, confirming that the trail was not designated public land, but rather an informal path that crossed multiple private properties. Next, I hired a surveyor who precisely marked our property lines, confirming what the deed already stated. The section of trail behind our home was entirely on our land. With documentation in hand, I applied for the necessary permits to install a simple wooden gate at the point where the trail entered our property. The design was intentionally welcoming, 6 feet wide to allow easy passage, with a latch rather than a lock. We even added solar-powered lights for safety during evening hours. Before installation began, I printed notices explaining our plans. These included the hours the gate would remain unlocked, 7:00 a.m. to 8:30 p.m., our reasons for the installation, child safety and property maintenance, and my contact information for any concerns. I personally delivered these to the 12 closest homes and posted several along the trail itself. The gate was completed on a Tuesday, and for the first week, everything seemed fine. Several neighbors even complimented the craftsmanship and expressed understanding about our safety concerns for the children. The Johnsons next door specifically thanked us for maintaining trail access while establishing clear boundaries. Then came the whispers. I noticed them first while picking up the kids from the bus stop, hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when I approached. Sarah mentioned receiving fewer waves and smiles during her morning runs. The real evidence appeared on the neighborhood digital message board when a post appeared asking if anyone else was concerned about recent attempts to privatize community spaces. Though our names were never mentioned, the comments made it clear they were discussing our gate. The trail has been open for years. No one should be allowed to block it now. What gives newcomers the right to change neighborhood traditions? Has anyone spoken to the HOA about this? I showed the comments to Sarah that evening and she frowned. I do not understand. We checked everything before installing the gate. We have all the paperwork. Maybe I should post a response, I suggested, but something held me back. A strange feeling settled in my stomach as I looked out at our beautiful new gate, that this simple wooden structure was about to become much more than a boundary marker. The doorbell rang at precisely 9:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning, three sharp chimes that seemed to carry unusual urgency. Through the frosted glass panels, I could make out a female silhouette standing with ramrod-straight posture on our front porch. When I opened the door, I found myself facing a woman in her early 50s with meticulously highlighted hair cut in a precise angled bob. Designer sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown, and she wore the kind of polished casual outfit that suggested both leisure and authority: pressed khakis, a crisp blue button-down, and a lightweight cream cardigan. "Good morning," she announced with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I am Diane Hollister, Vice President of the Oakwood Heights Homeowner Association and Neighborhood Watch Coordinator." She extended a manicured hand that I reluctantly shook. "May I speak with the homeowner?" "That would be me," I replied, noting how her eyes narrowed slightly in assessment. "I am James Miller. How can I help you?" Diane maintained her artificial smile, but her voice took on a condescending tone. "Well, James, I am here about the gate you have installed on the community trail. Several residents have expressed significant concerns about access being restricted to a path that has been used by everyone for over 15 years. I felt my defenses rising but maintained a calm demeanor. "I understand there might be some confusion. Would you like to come in? I have all the paperwork showing that section of the trail is on our property, and I have the permits for the gate installation." Diane stepped inside, her eyes scanning our home with obvious judgment. I retrieved the folder of documents from my office and laid them out on the dining table. "As you can see here, the property survey clearly shows the boundary lines, and this is the approved permit from the county for the gate installation." She glanced at the papers with obvious disinterest. "These technical documents do not address the real issue, James. The path has been open for 15 years. You cannot just close community access because you are new and do not understand our neighborhood culture." "But the gate is not locked during the day," I explained, pointing to the notice I had distributed. "It remains open from morning until evening. We are only concerned about nighttime trespassers and keeping our children safe." "Safe?" Diane scoffed. "From what? This is one of the safest neighborhoods in the county. That is precisely why people pay premium prices to live here." She slid the papers back toward me with one finger. "The community expects continued unrestricted access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as it has always been." When I politely but firmly stood my ground, explaining again about the property boundaries and permits, her facade cracked. "You know, we have ways of dealing with residents who do not cooperate with community standards." Her voice had turned glacial. "I strongly suggest you reconsider your position." After Diane left, Sarah emerged from upstairs where she had been listening. "That woman is unbelievable," she whispered. "What did she mean by ways of dealing with residents?" I shook my head, unsettled by the implied threat. "I have no idea, but we have done everything legally. We have nothing to worry about." How wrong I was. The following week brought escalating tension. Anonymous notes appeared tied to our gate with messages like "trails are for sharing" and "new neighbors should respect traditions." Twice, we found the latch mysteriously broken, requiring repairs. Most disturbing was the change in our neighbors. Families who had warmly welcomed us now crossed the street to avoid conversation, and Emma came home in tears after being excluded from a birthday party to which she had previously been invited. Sarah and I discussed removing the gate, but it felt fundamentally wrong to be bullied into submission when we had followed every proper procedure. Instead, I installed a small trail camera focused on the gate to document any further vandalism. The footage captured more than I expected. Diane appeared repeatedly, sometimes bringing different neighbors to point out supposed flaws in our installation. She measured distances, took photographs, and once spent nearly 15 minutes demonstrating to a group how our gate violated community standards by swinging it forcefully back and forth until the hinges squeaked. One evening, as I was returning from work, I spotted Diane with 3 other neighbors by our gate. When she noticed me watching from the driveway, she broke away from the group and approached with determined strides, stopping just close enough to invade my personal space. "This is not over," she hissed, her pleasant public persona completely vanished. "I know people who can make your life very difficult. That gate comes down, or you will regret moving to Oakwood Heights." As she walked away, I stood shocked by the naked hostility. This was no longer about a gate or a trail. I was facing a woman who viewed my family as intruders in her territory, and she had just declared war. The confrontation with Diane lit a fire within me, a determination to understand exactly what I was facing. The next day, instead of heading straight to the office, I drove to the county records department. The clerk seemed unsurprised when I explained the situation. "Property line disputes are unfortunately common," she said, pulling up digital archives on her computer, "especially in established neighborhoods when new owners assert their rights." I spent hours combing through records, initially focusing on our property and the trail. Then, on a hunch, I searched for previous disputes involving Oakwood Heights, and specifically Diane Hollister. What I found was illuminating. 3 separate complaints had been filed over the past 5 years involving property line conflicts, all with Diane listed as the complainant. In each case, the homeowners had eventually sold their properties and moved away. "She runs people off," the clerk murmured, noticing my focused attention on the screen. "Not officially, of course, but word gets around among county employees. That woman knows how to make life miserable through technically legal means." Armed with this knowledge, I expanded my research. I studied property law, focusing on easements, right-of-way issues, and HOA limitations. I printed copies of our neighborhood bylaws and highlighted sections pertinent to property modifications. Every evening after dinner, I spread these materials across our dining table, building a defense against what increasingly felt like inevitable conflict. Sarah watched with growing concern. "James, is all this necessary? Perhaps we should just remove the gate for the sake of peace." "And then what?" I asked, looking up from my papers. "We let Diane dictate what we can do on our own property. Where does it end?" My research was interrupted by an unexpected knock at our door one afternoon. It was Frank Reynolds, our 72-year-old neighbor from 3 houses down. Unlike the others, Frank had maintained his friendly wave whenever we crossed paths. "Thought you might want some context," he said, settling into our porch chair with the slow movements of age. "I have lived here since they built these houses in 1988. That trail, it was never in any official plans. It started as a shortcut the construction workers used between building sites. After the neighborhood was completed, people just kept using it. No easements were ever established. No agreements signed." Frank's insights proved invaluable. As one of the original homeowners, he remembered details about the neighborhood development that no document could provide. "Diane moved here 12 years ago," he continued. "Within 6 months, she was on the HOA board. Within a year, she was running it, unofficially, of course. The president is technically Bill Henderson, but he does whatever Diane suggests." A week later, an official letter arrived from the Oakwood Heights HOA. The envelope contained a formal complaint against our property, citing unauthorized obstruction of a community access point and demanding removal of the gate within 14 days. It was signed by Bill Henderson as president, but I had no doubt who had authored it. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. Sarah stayed home with the children while I arrived prepared with a folder containing our documentation. The small meeting room was unusually crowded. At least 30 residents filled the chairs, many faces I recognized but had never spoken with. Diane sat in the front row, whispering to those around her, occasionally glancing at me with thinly disguised contempt. Bill Henderson, a soft-spoken man with perpetually hunched shoulders, called the meeting to order. First agenda item, the recent complaint regarding access restriction to the North Trail. He nodded toward Diane. As the complainant, would you like to present your concerns? Diane stood and walked to the front, tablet in hand. She connected it to the projector with practiced ease and began a surprisingly professional presentation. For 15 years, our children have safely traveled this community path to school, she began, showing photos of smiling children walking along the trail, photos clearly taken years ago based on the outdated clothing styles. Elderly residents have enjoyed nature walks on this path. Another slide showed senior citizens I had never seen in the neighborhood. The manipulation was masterful. She presented close-up photos of our gate that made it appear imposing and fortress-like, omitting wider shots that would show its actual modest size. She referred to blocked children and confused elderly residents, carefully avoiding mentioning that the gate remained unlocked throughout daylight hours. When my turn came, I presented the property survey, permits, and documentation showing the trail crossed private property without established easements. I explained our safety concerns and emphasized the reasonable accommodations we had made with daytime access. A few residents nodded in understanding, but most faces remained impassive or hostile. As I drove home after the inconclusive meeting, the HOA had decided to review the matter further. Something nagged at my memory. Pulling into our driveway, I checked the footage from our security camera and found what had bothered me. Diane had been on our property multiple times, measuring, photographing, and once even testing the sturdiness of our gate posts by pulling on them forcefully. This trespassing was more than irritating. It was building towards something. But what? The late April sunshine streamed through our kitchen windows as I prepared Saturday lunch for the family. Emma and Ethan were playing a board game at the table while Sarah sorted through mail. It was one of those peaceful domestic moments that reminded me why we had wanted this home in the first place. The tranquility shattered when I glanced out the window and spotted Diane walking purposefully along our property line. She was not alone. Two men in button-down shirts and khakis followed her, one carrying a clipboard, the other taking photographs. The three stopped at our gate, where Diane gestured emphatically while speaking. "Sarah, watch the kids," I said, my pulse quickening. "Someone is inspecting our property without permission." I walked outside calmly, crossing our yard toward the small group. As I approached, I could hear Diane speaking in authoritative tones. "As you can see, gentlemen, the obstruction prevents clear access and creates a safety hazard for residents." "Good afternoon," I said, keeping my voice level as I reached them. All three turned, the men looking slightly startled while Diane maintained her composure. "May I ask what you are doing on my property?" Diane stepped forward immediately, clipboard in hand. "We are conducting an official inspection of the illegal obstruction you have placed on the community access trail." She gestured to the men beside her. "These are county officials documenting the violation." I turned toward the men, extending my hand. "James Miller, property owner. May I see some identification, please? I was not notified about any official inspection today." The two men exchanged uncomfortable glances. One finally spoke. "I am Tom Barrett and this is Jim Wilkins. We are with the Neighborhood Association." The county planning division, Diane interrupted sharply. The inconsistency hung in the air for a moment. I kept my focus on the men. So are you with the county or the neighborhood association? And do you have official credentials I could see? Also, I would like to know what specific ordinance you are investigating. The shorter man cleared his throat. Well, we are actually. They do not need to show you anything, Diane cut in, her voice rising. This is official business and you are interfering with their duties. Actually, ma'am, I replied calmly, since this is private property, they do need either my permission or a court order to conduct inspections. Without either, this constitutes trespassing. The taller man started backing away. Look, there seems to be some confusion. Perhaps we should reschedule after proper notices have been filed. Diane's face flushed deep red. No, you cannot leave. He is being uncooperative and preventing a legitimate inspection. She turned to me, finger pointed inches from my face. You need to step aside and allow these officials to do their job. Please lower your finger and step back, I said firmly. You are on my property without permission, and you have misrepresented these gentlemen's authority. I am asking all of you to leave now. What happened next still seems surreal in my memory. Diane pulled out her cell phone and began dialing with trembling fingers. What are you doing? The shorter man asked. Calling the police, she snapped, then turned away as the call connected. Yes, hello. I need police assistance immediately at 427 Oak Ridge Lane. I am being threatened by a homeowner who has illegally blocked access to our community trail. We feel unsafe and are being prevented from conducting an official inspection. Please hurry. The two men looked horrified, backing further away and muttering about not being part of this. I stood frozen in disbelief as Diane continued embellishing the situation to the dispatcher, describing me as aggressive and potentially dangerous. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled into my driveway, lights flashing but sirens mercifully silent. Neighbors emerged from homes up and down the street, watching the scene unfold. My children's faces appeared at the window, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Sarah joined them, hand over her mouth in shock. 2 officers approached cautiously. One remained near Diane while the other walked toward me. Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. Can you tell me what is happening here? I explained the situation calmly, then retrieved my folder of documentation from the house. The officer reviewed the property survey, permits, and installation approvals with professional interest, while his partner spoke with Diane and the 2 men, who now identified themselves correctly as friends of Diane's who had been asked to look official for the inspection. So let me understand this, the first officer said, handing back my documents. You installed a gate on your private property with proper permits. The gate remains unlocked during daylight hours as a courtesy to neighbors who want to use the trail. And Mrs. Hollister called 911 claiming to be threatened because you asked for identification from unauthorized people on your property. That is correct, I confirmed. The officer nodded grimly and rejoined his partner. I could not hear their full conversation with Diane, but fragments reached me. False report, misrepresentation, and waste of police resources. Diane's voice grew increasingly strident as she realized the officers were not taking her side. Do you know who my husband is? She suddenly shouted, loud enough for the entire street to hear. He is on the city council. You will all be hearing from our attorney. This is not over. The officers maintained their professional demeanor, but I caught one briefly rolling his eyes. After issuing Diane a stern warning about false reports and trespassing, they apologized to me for the disturbance and departed. As the police cars pulled away, curious neighbors lingered, many now openly starring at Diane. Her carefully cultivated image of neighborhood authority had cracked publicly. With a final venomous glare in my direction, she stormed off toward her home, phone already pressed to her ear. Inside, I hugged my frightened children and tried to explain what had happened in terms they could understand. "Sometimes adults disagree about rules," I said gently, "but the police help sort things out. Everything is okay now." But looking at Sarah's worried face, I knew this was far from over. The battle lines had been drawn in spectacularly public fashion, and our peaceful life in Oakwood Heights would never be the same. The 911 incident transformed our private dispute into neighborhood spectacle. By Sunday morning, video clips of Diane's meltdown had appeared on the community app, filmed by neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation. Comments exploded beneath the posts, revealing deep divisions among residents. Some expressed shock at Diane's behavior, cannot believe she called the police over a gate that is not even locked during the day. Others doubled down on her position. Newcomers should not be blocking trails that have been open for decades. Our family became unwilling celebrities in a drama we had never sought. Walking the children to the bus stop became an exercise in discomfort. Some parents pointedly gathered their children closer when we approached, while others made a point of greeting us warmly. Each interaction a declaration of allegiance in the growing neighborhood civil war. The physical manifestations of hostility began small. An anonymous letter appeared in our mailbox, printed in generic font. "Oakwood Heights has traditions. Respect them or reconsider your residence here." Next came the social exclusions. Emma returned from school tearful after learning about a skating party to which every other girl in her class had been invited. The escalation continued. One morning, I discovered our gate spray-painted with the word "selfish" in large red letters. Our security camera had been deliberately tilted upward the night before, preventing identification of the vandals. When I filed a police report, the responding officer was sympathetic but not optimistic. "Without evidence, there is not much we can do," he explained. "Though between us, we all know who is behind this." Online, the situation intensified. Diane had created a Save Our Trail group on the neighborhood platform, positioning herself as defender of community values against entitled newcomers. Posts appeared daily, each more inflammatory than the last, distorting facts and rallying supporters to her cause. "These people think they can buy their way in and immediately start changing our neighborhood. What's next? Blocking the road because it crosses their driveway." The campaign took a toll on our family. Sarah developed anxiety that manifested in sleepless nights. The children asked why everyone was mad at us. I found myself checking our security cameras multiple times daily, jumping at unexpected sounds. Yet amid the hostility came unexpected support. Frank continued to visit regularly, bringing occasional reinforcements, longtime residents who rejected Diane's version of neighborhood history. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had lived 3 doors down for 30 years, approached Sarah at the grocery store. "That path was never meant to be public," she assured her. "It was just a shortcut through undeveloped lots. When they built the houses, everyone understood each property owner could decide about access. Diane is rewriting history." More supporters emerged at an emergency community meeting Diane organized at the clubhouse. While she had packed the front rows with allies, several longtime residents spoke up to contradict her claims about the trail's historical community status. Meanwhile, Diane escalated to legal threats, filing complaints with every municipal department possible. Inspectors appeared to check our fence height, drainage patterns, and even the species of ornamental grasses in our front landscaping. Each investigation found nothing actionable, fueling Diane's frustration and increasingly erratic behavior. The breaking point came one evening when Ethan approached me in my home office, his face solemn beyond his 8 years. "Dad, why does everyone hate us?" Jaden said his mom told him not to play with me because our family does not respect community rules. As I struggled to explain adult conflicts in child-appropriate terms, my email pinged with a message from Frank. The subject line read simply, "Found something you need to see." The attached files contained scanned documents from the original neighborhood development in 1988. Frank had contacted the retired developer who still lived in the area, and together they had located the original plans and agreements. What I read changed everything. Not only had the trail never been designated for public use in any official capacity, but the developer had explicitly noted in the original covenants that each homeowner maintained complete authority over access across their property. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Inform buyers that informal paths may exist but are subject to individual property rights." The supposed community trail that Diane had so vigorously defended had never existed in any official capacity. It was simply an informal shortcut that crossed multiple private properties, including ours. Everything we had done was not only legally permitted, but explicitly protected in the original neighborhood documents. This was the ammunition we needed, not just to defend ourselves, but to end Diane's reign of neighborhood terror once and for all. "Document everything," Jennifer Ramirez advised, sliding the papers back across her desk. As an attorney specializing in real estate and property disputes, she had reviewed my growing file with professional interest. Every incident, every communication, every act of harassment. You already have a strong case, but we want it to be bulletproof. I had decided that passive defense was no longer sufficient. With Jennifer's guidance, I developed a comprehensive strategy. First came enhanced security, additional cameras with night vision capabilities positioned strategically around our property. Next, a detailed log of every incident, dates, times, descriptions, and supporting evidence carefully organized in both digital and physical formats. When Diane organized a group of supporters to stand near our property line with "Save Our Trail" signs one Saturday morning, I recorded it from multiple angles. When she distributed flyers containing misleading information about property laws throughout the neighborhood, I collected copies as evidence. Each action she took dug her hole deeper. The most serious incidents warranted immediate legal response. With Jennifer's help, I filed for restraining orders against 2 individuals who had been captured on camera, vandalizing our property and leaving threatening notes. The sheriff's department served these papers during daylight hours, creating a visible demonstration that legal consequences had begun. My next strategic move was requesting a private meeting with Bill Henderson, the HOA president, and Janet Foster, the association secretary. I deliberately excluded Diane, citing her direct involvement in the dispute as the reason. They agreed to meet at the community center on a Tuesday morning when Diane would be at her part-time job. Frank accompanied me to the meeting, along with Jennifer. I began by presenting the original neighborhood documents he had discovered, followed by our property survey and permits. Next came the chronological documentation of harassment, dozens of incidents ranging from social ostracism to property damage, all linked directly or indirectly to Diane. "We have evidence that Mrs. Hollister trespassed on our property multiple times," Jennifer explained, showing security footage. She misrepresented these men as county officials during an unauthorized inspection. And most seriously, she filed a false police report that resulted in emergency response. Bill and Janet exchanged uncomfortable glances. We had no idea things had gone this far, Bill admitted. The HOA has never authorized any of these actions. There is more, I continued, playing the audio recording from my trail camera. Diane instructing someone to accidentally break our gate latch again. This constitutes conspiracy to commit vandalism. By meeting's end, both HOA officers looked genuinely disturbed. I need to review all this with our association attorney, Bill said, but speaking personally, I am appalled. This goes against everything our community stands for. With the HOA leadership now aware of the full situation, I moved to the next phase of our strategy. Working with Frank, Mrs. Rodriguez, and several other allies, we created a comprehensive information packet for the neighborhood. It contained property maps showing accurate boundaries, a simplified explanation of relevant property laws, and the original neighborhood documents confirming each owner's rights regarding the trail. Most powerfully, it included a timeline of harassment our family had endured, presented factually and without emotional language, but devastating in its totality. The final pages contained photographs of our gate with the spray-painted vandalism, printouts of the most inflammatory online posts by Diane, and documentation of the false police report incident. Rather than distributing this information immediately, I hand-delivered copies to 12 key neighborhood influencers: the retired school principal at the corner house, the doctor who organized the annual block party, the young couple who ran the community garden. Each was selected for their reputation for fairness and their wide social connections. I am not asking you to take sides, I told each of them, just to review this information and share the facts with neighbors who ask. We want transparency about what has actually occurred. The strategy worked brilliantly. Within days, the information had spread organically through the neighborhood, carried by trusted voices rather than appearing as direct retaliation. I began noticing subtle shifts. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact now offered tentative waves, and comments on the community app became more balanced. The final step came after consulting again with Jennifer. I filed a formal harassment complaint against Diane with both the HOA and local authorities. The complaint included evidence of her trespassing, the false police report, and documentation of what appeared to be an orchestrated intimidation campaign. This is not about revenge, I explained to Sarah as I prepared the documents. This is about establishing boundaries and consequences. No one should be allowed to terrorize a family simply for exercising their legal property rights. As I sealed the envelope containing the complaint, I felt not anger but resolve. The path forward was clear, not just for our gate, but for restoring peace to a neighborhood that had lived too long under Diane's toxic influence. The response to our information packet rippled through Oakwood Heights like a stone dropped in still water. Initially, there were small circles of conversation, neighbors speaking in driveways or over shared fences. Then came the direct approaches. The Thompsons from 2 streets over stopped me while I was mowing the lawn. "We had no idea what was happening," Mrs. Thompson said, genuine distress in her voice. "Diane told everyone such a different story. We feel terrible about how your family has been treated." Similar conversations repeated throughout the week. Parents approached Sarah at school pickup to apologize for the exclusion of our children. A plate of homemade cookies appeared on our porch with a card signed by several families. The HOA called an emergency executive session to address the formal complaint. Though closed to general residents, Frank, who served on the Architectural Review Committee, informed me of the outcome. Diane had been suspended from her position pending investigation of ethics violations. The board had also issued a formal statement to all residents clarifying that our gate installation was completely within our rights as property owners. Official consequences extended beyond the neighborhood. The police department issued Diane a formal warning about filing false reports. More significantly, the county prosecutor's office contacted me about potentially pursuing charges for harassment and criminal trespassing based on the evidence we had submitted. Throughout this period, Diane remained uncharacteristically silent. Her online presence disappeared. The Save Our Trail group was quietly archived. Neighbors reported that she had stopped attending her regular tennis matches and book club meetings. 2 weeks after the formal complaint was filed, I arrived home from work to find Diane and her husband Richard standing in my driveway. Richard, a man I had only seen from a distance during neighborhood events, looked deeply uncomfortable. Diane clutched a folder similar to the information packet we had distributed. "We need to talk," she announced as I exited my car. Her voice lacked its usual imperious tone. I gestured toward my front porch. "We can speak there," I offered, deliberately choosing a visible location for any interaction. Before I could unlock my door, Diane thrust the folder toward me. "You need to retract these lies immediately," she demanded. "This so-called documentation is defamatory and damaging to my reputation. Richard is prepared to file a lawsuit if this is not corrected." I remained calm. "Everything in that packet is factually accurate and supported by evidence. You are welcome to have your attorney review it." "You have turned the neighborhood against us with these distortions," she continued, voice rising. "After everything I have done for this community, this is how people repay me, by believing your version of events." Richard placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Diane, that is enough." "No, he needs to understand that he cannot just move in and destroy everything I have built here." Her voice had reached the shrill pitch I remembered from the police incident. Richard's expression shifted from discomfort to something like revelation. He took the folder from her hands and opened it, scanning the contents with growing dismay. The security camera footage of Diane instructing someone to break our gate, the transcript of the false police report, the documented timeline of harassment. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. "Did you really do these things?" "They are taken out of context," she sputtered. "I was protecting our neighborhood traditions." Richard closed the folder slowly. "I need to go," he said, his voice flat. Without another word to either of us, he walked away toward their home, ignoring Diane's calls to wait. Her composure crumbled as she watched him leave. Without her audience, without her partner, the fight seemed to drain from her. She gave me one last venomous look before following him, her shoulders slumped in defeat. In the months that followed, our neighborhood found a new equilibrium. My gate remained exactly where it was, now with an official sign stating private property hours. Most neighbors respected these boundaries, and those who had participated in the harassment kept their distance. The unexpected outcome was a stronger community, one built on honest communication rather than manipulation and fear. New traditions emerged. The community park, rather than private properties, became the gathering place for neighborhood events. A proper,